Allow me to read you guys a story. The reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take Boots, for example. He earned $38 a month plus allowances. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots that Vimes always bought, and wore until the soles were so thin that he could tell where he was in Ankh-Morpork on a foggy night by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while the poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. This was Captain Samuel Vine's Boots' Theory of Socioeconomic Unfairness. This is an excerpt of all places, a fantasy novel by Terry Pratchett called Men at Arms. For those unaware, Terry Pratchett was a very famous fantasy author, responsible for the 41-book Discworld series, of which this book was a part of. The point that Terry Pratchett was trying to get across in this passage was that it's expensive to be poor. Saving money in the long run often means investing a little bit of money in the short run, something that's almost impossible for people who are living paycheck to paycheck. Not only does the man in the passage have to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars more over the course of 10 years just to own a pair of boots, those boots are not even of the same quality as the more expensive ones, so they don't even keep his feet dry in the way that they should. And boots are essential, especially if you work a physical job. You can't just go without boots for 6 months to save up what you need in order to pay for the more expensive ones. You need boots in order to go to work and earn a paycheck, so you're going to buy whatever pair of boots that you can afford at the time. This theory of socioeconomic unfairness that was so eloquently described in Terry Pratchett's novel is prevalent across all of our society. The poor pay more for an inferior product, but the rich are able to spend less and receive something of higher quality because they have the initial capital to invest. Take, for example, just the simple act of buying groceries. At my local grocery store, a 1-pound bag of rice costs 99 cents, or roughly $1 per pound. On the other hand, a 10-pound bag of rice costs $4.99, roughly 50 cents per pound. If you've only got $10 to get you through the week for groceries, which bag are you going to choose? This is a small example to be sure, but those small examples add up, and over the course of a month or 6 months or a year, the person living paycheck to paycheck will spend way more money on rice than someone who's well off and can spend the initial money to buy the bigger bag. There are other factors that go into this as well. People in poverty are less likely to own their own vehicles, relying mostly on walking or public transportation. I have personally never experienced poverty, but I have spent many years living without a car, so I know firsthand that I often had to plan my grocery trips around how much I could physically carry home. I almost never purchased that 10-pound bag of rice unless I was getting very few other items. People living paycheck to paycheck probably don't live in large homes with a bunch of storage space, and a small apartment probably doesn't have a dedicated pantry to store bulk foods. Non-perishable items like toilet paper and paper towels are bulky and take up a lot of space, but they're so much cheaper if you buy them in large packs, like quantities of 36 or 48. But if you live in a studio apartment or rent a room in a house with 5 other people, you just probably don't have space to store a bunch of these items, so you buy what you need when you need it, even if it costs more in the long run. There is a reason that mega wholesale warehouses like Costco, a place renowned for its low prices on bulk items, have customers with an average household income of around $100,000 and live mostly in the suburbs where larger homes offer more storage space. Not only is there an upfront $60 membership fee, but buying in bulk causes average shopping trips to run between $130 and $140, over double or triple what customers typically spend at other grocery stores like Kroger or Walmart. According to a study by Coriolis Research, less than 15% of Costco shoppers are just getting by or poor, further offering proof that the savings of buying in bulk is just not accessible to people living paycheck to paycheck. But food is just one part of your monthly expenses, right? Well, unfortunately, being poor is expensive even when you look at other areas of your budget. For example, for many of us, the largest expense we have is our housing costs, whether you buy or rent. Purchasing a house usually requires a large down payment, typically about 20% of the purchase price. There are also closing costs to pay realtors, lenders, and other people involved in the process, which can range anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 depending on your location and the price of the home. Renting, on the other hand, has comparatively little upfront cost. You'll often need to pay a security deposit and the first month's rent, but this number pales in comparison to the thousands and thousands of dollars you need just to purchase a home. Granted, there are some down payment assistance programs out there, like the FHA loan, which is meant for first-time home buyers, but those loans typically require at least some money down. So even with closing costs and everything added in, you're still looking at probably at least $10,000, if not more, just to purchase a home. But depending on the location, mortgage payments can be cheaper than renting, and they're often similar even when accounting for extra costs like insurance, taxes, and repair and maintenance. But to really drive home this comparison, you have to take it a step further. Though some of the money that you pay towards those mortgage payments goes towards the interest of just taking the loan, a huge chunk of that money actually goes to building you equity. This essentially means that you're keeping the value of those equity payments as part of your net worth. You're just transferring cash into a physical asset, which is your home. Financially, the rough rule of thumb is to rent if you plan on living somewhere for less than 5 years. But if you plan on living somewhere longer, it's a good idea to buy a home, because the equity that you've built in that home will put you ahead financially than if you had rented for all of those years. And because housing is such a big expense, the difference between buying and renting over a long period of time can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's say, for instance, that you can rent a small one-bedroom apartment for $1,000 a month. There's a much larger house in the suburbs that costs $250,000. At a 20% down payment, that would require that you put $50,000 down. And let's estimate $10,000 in closing costs, so a total of $60,000. At a 3.5% interest rate, your monthly mortgage would be about $900 a month. And let's estimate an additional $300 for repairs, maintenance, taxes, and insurance. So over the course of 10 years, if you buy that house in the suburbs, you would pay upfront $60,000 between the down payment and the closing costs, and then $144,000 over the course of 10 years between your monthly mortgage payments, your repairs, your maintenance, your taxes, and insurance. That's about $204,000 total, but almost half of that money, roughly $95,000, would have actually gone towards building you equity in that home. In the US, homes typically appreciate about 3 to 5% per year, so let's split the difference and say 4%. After 10 years, this home that you purchased for $250,000 is now worth $370,000 for a total gain of $120,000. All of that appreciation acts as equity straight to your pocket, so now you have a physical asset worth roughly $215,000 after accounting for the money that you still owe. So over the course of 10 years, although you've spent $204,000 on all of the costs associated with just owning the home, you actually own something that's worth $215,000, so you've made a small profit. Comparatively, if you had rented for all of those years in that small one-bedroom apartment, you would have spent $120,000 in rent, and that's assuming that your rent doesn't increase each year, which it probably will. So not only are you actually making a small profit off of your primary residence, instead of spending over $100,000 to rent, it actually goes back to the example that Terry Pratchett used in his novel. You're able to buy a higher quality item, in this case a much larger house in the suburbs, because you have the initial capital to invest. It's expensive to be poor, because living paycheck to paycheck just doesn't allow you to save up enough money to invest in something that will save you more money in the long run. There are other more subtle examples of socioeconomic unfairness prevalent in our society that often go unnoticed by people who are well off. For instance, take a moment and check to see whether your checking account has a monthly fee and what you can do to get that monthly fee waived. Most people with stable jobs and padded bank accounts never see this fee because they automatically meet all of the criteria to get it waived. For example, Chase checking accounts have a monthly fee of $12. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but everything adds up, especially when you're living paycheck to paycheck and every dollar counts. In order to get this fee waived, you have to meet one of the following criteria. First, you can have at least $500 in direct deposits from an employer each month. Most people working stable jobs, especially white-collar jobs, will meet this without any issue. But people with less stable jobs, or people who just recently became unemployed and are still waiting to receive unemployment benefits, or even people whose employers still pay them by check, all of these people will have issues meeting this requirement. People in poverty just don't have as consistent of an income as people who are well off, so this can mean that they struggle to meet the $500 in direct deposits on a given month. But no worries, there are other ways to get this monthly fee waived, and they're so easy, except they're actually not. The second way to get the $12 monthly fee waived is by having $1,500 in your checking account every single day of the month. That's right, if you move money around or pay off a card or something and your balance dips below $1,500 even just one day of that month, you get hit with the monthly fee. And for people living paycheck to paycheck, it's unlikely that they have $1,500 laying around that they can dedicate to keeping their checking account balance high enough to avoid a monthly fee. There are other fees too that exist to line the pockets of the banks at the expense of people who can afford it the least. When you charge something to your debit card and you don't have enough money in your checking account to cover the purchase, banks will sometimes charge you an overdraft fee. This means that if you spend even a penny more than you have available, maybe because you miscalculated or just forgot to check your balance that day, banks will temporarily cover the charge, but then you'll be hit with a $30 to $40 fee. Banks will claim that this is a service that they provide to save you the embarrassment of having your card declined, but the reality is it's a huge moneymaker for them. In 2019, banks in the US took in a whopping $11 billion in overdraft fees, most of them coming from a small subset of their customers. Some banks will allow you to turn off overdraft protection so that if you charge something and you don't have enough money to cover it in your checking account, your card just gets declined instead of being hit with a big overdraft fee, but usually this is turned on by default. Some banks have even gotten into legal trouble for screwing over their customers even more. For example, let's say that somebody has $50 left in their checking account. On one day, they make 3 purchases of $10 each, and then 1 purchase of $60. Based on that order, they should only get hit with the overdraft fee once, when their last purchase goes through. But Bank of America was actually hit with a lawsuit and forced to pay out $410 million because it was found that they were deliberately reordering purchases so that the most expensive charge came first, thereby immediately pushing their customers into a negative balance. Thus, in that example, they were able to not only charge an overdraft fee on the $60 purchase, but also on the other 3 $10 purchases, so they were able to charge 4 overdraft fees instead of just 1. If the overdraft fee is $30, that's $120 that the customer has to pay just in fees, not to mention the money that's needed to pay the amount that they borrowed back. Although predatory bank fees and policies might be a bit subtle, a clear dichotomy between the rich and the poor is probably best represented with credit cards. If you ask the question, what do you think of credit cards to both a rich and a poor person, I guarantee you their answers could not be more different. The rich person might say that credit cards allow them to earn perks on purchases that they were going to make anyway, things like airline points or 2% cash back. They might also say that credit cards help prevent fraud because you're using the bank's money, not your own, and all of these things are true. They'll tell you that they've never paid a dime in credit card interest, and in fact have actually profited by using credit cards. But you're not going to hear the same sentiment from somebody living in poverty. To them, a credit card is both their saving grace and their tightest handcuff. Credit cards allow you to borrow a bit of money temporarily if you have an unexpected emergency and you don't have enough cash on hand to cover it. Say your car breaks down, but you need your car to get to work. Well, you can't just wait a month or 2 until you have enough money saved up to cover the car repair. You need your car in order to get to work, otherwise you're not going to get a paycheck to pay for the car repair. So what can you do? I mean, your only real option, especially if you don't have any support from family or friends, is to borrow money. And the easiest way to borrow money is by putting that expense on a credit card. It's easy to say, well, just be responsible with credit cards and pay them off in full every month, but for somebody living paycheck to paycheck, they don't have an emergency fund to dip into for unexpected expenses. To them, their credit card has to function as their emergency fund because they have nothing else. But when credit cards charge between 20 or 30 or even 40% interest, it can be really difficult to claw back out of that debt, making you more susceptible to future emergencies and just furthering the cycle. And this is why it's so challenging for people in poverty to make any meaningful progress on their financial situation. Any additional money that they're able to save and put away will just have to go to paying back debts at larger amounts than they borrowed, so they're essentially taking 1 step forward but 2 steps back. A simple emergency fund would solve this problem, but they can't keep their head above water long enough in order to build one. This, like everything else we've discussed in this video, is an example of the poverty trap, a mechanism in the economic system that makes it increasingly difficult to escape poverty. The analysis of poverty is extremely complex, and there are many systematic barriers that make it very difficult to break out of, especially when you bring in other topics into the conversation like race. I absolutely did not touch on everything in this video or even most of it. This was a grand oversimplification of an issue that's become even more apparent as our society's wealth divide has broadened. but I hope I was able to give you guys a bit of an insight on ways that it's more expensive to be poor that you may have not previously considered. If you guys did learn something from this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing because I make videos every week on a range of all sorts of personal finance topics. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.